The future Ian Machado Garry is one of the hottest prospects in all of MMA, and he's going to make his fourth walk to the octagon, all on UFC pay-per-view undercards. This guy has talent. They will tell you that. The former Cage Warriors welterweight champ. He's going to be taking on a man with an 89% finish rate in Team Alpha Male, Song Kenan. And this is a very volatile matchup in the welterweight division, because for Machado Garry, the future, it's now. The pressure, it's there. And for Garry, you knew him for the finishes, you know him for the judo and the boxing that he possesses, and he switched camps. Like, he's really made a nice stable home at Killcliff FC. He added that middle to the last name, if you catch my drift, after he married Layla Anna Lee earlier last year. But for Ian Machado Garry, you look at it in the UFC, and I'm not going to say, like, the potential hasn't been realized, but he had a barn burner of a fight where he got tied against Jordan Williams and he finished him. He had a fight against Darian Weeks where he struck off the back foot and outstruck Weeks, who tried to wrestle him. And then he did the same thing against Gabe Green. Now, he boxed Green's ears in that one. He dropped him near the end of the fight. Yeah. But for Ian Machado Garry, I know, like, we like him. MMA fans like him. Joe Rogan definitely likes him because he gets to comment on his fights. But for Garry, I know Williams was a knockout artist. I know Darian Weeks was so well-rounded. And same thing for Gabe Green. Song Kenan, I say he's a finishing artist. Watch the guy fight. That's what he does. He walks across the cage, throws massive shots, and he tries to wrestle some of his opponents at the same time, too. And I don't have to just say this. Go watch Song Kenan's fight against Brad Riddell when they had a catchweight fight years ago. And in that fight, Song Kenan's beaten Brad Riddell for portions of that fight. And then at the end, Brad lands a body shot, and it's like a glancing left hook. Kenan, like, doubles over, and that's where Brad Riddell goes in and gets the finish. So I love this fight, Matt. Obviously, Song Kenan's not going to get anybody's respect this fight week, and it's all about Ian Machado Garry. But I'm here to say, rewatching Song Kenan fights is a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. I have a simple breakdown for this fight, and I have a very complicated breakdown for this fight, so I guess I'll get both very quick. I wasn't sold on Ian Garry up until his last fight, and I can openly admit that. If you've watched any of our videos, I was always very critical on him because, again, I just mentioned this with Cameron Saaiman. He is great offensively, but defensively you do worry about him, especially when he's going to fight a big puncher. And I thought that big puncher was going to be Gabe Green, a guy who's very athletic, can eat a big shot, can wrestle a little bit offensively, and when he gets into the pocket, he throws hammers. And I thought some of the lapses that Ian Garry had defensively were going to get him caught in that fight. Now, did I love the gameplay he had in that fight? You would kind of mention it. Not necessarily, because boxing on the back foot against a lot of guys at the top of the division, like, is that going to be a good game plan against Jeff Neal? Probably not. Like, guys in the top 15 are going to figure out some of the flaws in your game that way, but Garry was really impressive with his boxing combinations in that fight.
And that right cross that he was able to land, he slipped.
And it was accurate, too. That's the thing. Not a lot of wasted movement with Ian Garry. He's not a guy who's going to go out there, throw a lot of big shots like a prime Vanderlei Silva and just kind of hope for the best, you know? He is a lot more aim and fire instead of spray and pray, and that's why this fight, I think, could go one way, and it could be very simple. If Song Kenan meets Ian Garry in the middle of the octagon, I think Ian Garry's going to knock him out. I do. I just think he has too much firepower in a fight like that where they go shot for shot. Not that I don't think Song can get his own shots in. I just think Garry's the bigger guy naturally, because Ian Garry, to his credit, is as big as a welterweight as you can ever see. He's 6'3", but he's not a thin 6'3". He's not built like a Neil Magny. He is a more filled out fighter, and he does have great power when he is able to land. I just think if they do get into one of those barn burner type of fights, it does favor Garry tremendously. Now, if Kenan is able to mix in some of his own wrestling and put those question marks into Garry's mind, I do think it will help him open up with some of his striking. But again, the problem I keep on going back to is I just think Garry has a little bit more firepower at the end of his shots, and I just worry about Song Kenan getting into one of those one-for-one pitter-patter
fights.
It's
a weird matchup. If you're trying to build a prospect, you have him fight Jordan Williams, a former middleweight. You have him fight, Darian Weeks, who doesn't have a lot of pro experience, but a lot of amateur experience, and I might be the biggest Darian Weeks supporter out there in the world. And then you have him fight Gabe Green, a really tough fighter, and then you have him kind of step down a bit and fight Song Kenan. And Song Kenan, again, he's a finisher. In the UFC, has finish wins over Bobby Nash, Hector Aldana, and Callan Potter. And poor Judo Dan was in the corner watching his boy lose in that one. And he also has a win, does Kenan, over Derek Krantz, the former LFA champ. That's a quality win. Lost in the UFC to Alex Morono. Alex Morono's a good fighter. And Max Griffin, he lost to him, but that was Song Kenan's last fight. And that was back in March of 2021. The co-main event of Derek Brunson, Kevin Holland, was Song Kenan and Max Griffin. So if you say they don't care about co-main events on Fight Night cards, they didn't 2 years ago. But the point out of this one, Matt, The last win for Sung Kenan was that fight with Judo Dan in attendance. That was back in February of 2020. So Sung Kenan's going out there looking for his first win in 3 years. Odd matchmaking. Feels like it favors the prospect, but you do have a very dangerous opponent in the blue corner.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, the prime blue corner.
It's like when you're doing My League and NBA and you're doing scouting, it'll give you the floor and the ceiling for what a lot of prospects will be. The way I look at Ian Garry is his floor is probably Max Griffin. I think that's fair to say. Like, they're both good boxers. Ian Garry has way more power, I would say, even though
Both
Max
good
Griffin
at
has better
wrestling.
volume. They're both good offensive wrestling. I just think Ian Garry's potential far supersedes what Max Griffin's does. And that's why I do think Ian Garry has a lot of the same strengths as Max Griffin, which he was able to showcase against Sung Kenan. And that's why if Ian Garry didn't fight his last fight against Gabe Green, I'd probably pick Sung Kenan in this matchup. But Garry answered a lot of those questions for me in his last fight.
Well, Sung Kenan now aligning himself with Team Alpha Male, and he's trying to do this, like the monsters. Take that boxing glove and suck the powers, because Sung Kenan's training with Sage Northcutt for this fight. So
Super
interesting
Sage.
stuff there for Sung Kenan. He's the heavy underdog. Big favorite is Ian Garry. We have a look at the topology votes. Matt, surprised us there to you. I'm going to say over under a 90% Ian Garry.
Probably over.
The fans are wild. Yep, they're wild. 1,391 total votes, 95%. Machado Garry, 63% by knockout for the 5% that have Sung Kenan to win, 43% by knockout. I have Ian Garry to get the win because, oddly enough, I like his striking off the back foot. I think his boxing combinations are a little bit cleaner. He doesn't waste a lot of energy compared to Sung Kenan, who just... He burns hot, and, I mean, he's got a winning record, and he's deserving to be in the UFC. But
good
for me, I do like Ian Garry in the matchup. You look at the guys that he trains with getting ready for one like this. Brandon Allen, last week's, impromptu main event. Kevin Lee. There's so many big fighters, like at welterweight and at middleweight for Ian Garry to train with at Killcliff. I love it. So, like the king of 4 rounds, Matt, Butterbean, I think Ian Garry goes out there and gets a big win.
I can admit this. I don't know what Ian Garry's ceiling is. Like, do you have an idea yet? I don't personally. Like, with Jack Della Maddalena, I felt pretty comfortable after the Ramzan and me fight. Like, this guy's going to be pretty good. Amiv's a good fighter. He's well-rounded. He's been around. He's fought a lot of really good fighters. And for Maddalena to fight him the way he did, get taken down, pop back up, and knock him out, I was impressed enough to really think, wow, this guy has a promising future. With Garry, I was really impressed in him based off his last fight against Gabe Green. But even if he beats Sung Kenan, you had mentioned this, that's not really going to make me any more impressed than what he was able to do over Gabe Green. So I think if, let's say, he goes out there and gets a finish this weekend, then it's time for him to really get that necessary step up in competition for us to really get a good idea as to where he could fall in the division.
Both of us going with Ireland's Ian Machado Garry to get the win in the matchup. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have. Some big fights left on this card, including Jeff Neal is taking on Shavkat Rakhmonov. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it.